So everybody prepared a question,
Oh, that's wonderful. Okay, great.
and some of which I know and some of which I don't.
Okay.
And they range from questions about the ranchero culture and its
Yes.
influence on the
Okay.
development of the black tar heroin trade to issues of morality.
Great. Good
And,
question, that.
policy issues, what policies do you think might have some effect? There's a question, at least one about methodology, how you did your research.
Oh, I see. Oh, good.
So-
Great. Okay. Well,
We're going to just have everybody ask
Yes,
a question.
great,
and
great.
then you can respond and see how it kind of
all right then.
points its way. Does that
I
make
mean,
sense?
I'm happy to do anything y'all want.
Okay.
Well, let me tell you a little bit about how I started the book. Okay, that'll maybe get things going. First of all, I've been a reporter almost 30 years. This is, again, my third book. I started this book, well, I didn't really think I was starting a book when this happened, but I started this book, something I talk about in it, as part of a team of reporters. I had lived in Mexico for 10 years. I came back in '04. And quite to my surprise, honestly, the pretty savage and medieval, almost drug war that kicked off in Mexico in 2005, 2006, and then got progressively worse. I'd never seen anything like that when I was living in Mexico. Not one decapitation in 10 years, I can assure you. And so I was put on a team of reporters at the LA Times to cover this in a variety of ways. My job was to cover how Mexican drugs were trafficked across America once they get across the border. And that was a really good idea. Unfortunately, they stopped it after a while, but it was a terrific idea because we almost never cover that, except for there's some indictment, some arrest, something like that. Then 20 guys, most of them from Mexico, arrested. They all faced umpteen years in prison, whatever. And I was part of that. I came upon that story in Huntington, West Virginia, of all these people dying of black tar heroin. And black tar heroin to me had always been, I've been a crime reporter before I went to Mexico, in California, and black tar heroin was always a Western United States drug. It had never gone across. So stumbling onto that was important. And along with that, though, I mean, I think the reason I recognized the story in the first place and didn't take, when he said, when the DEA agent, I think I read about in the book, when the DEA agent said, they're all from one town. And then he comes back and he says, Tepic, Nayarit. I knew right then that he wasn't lying, but he was wrong. I knew that a system like he had described, and almost all drug trafficking comes from the rancho in Mexico. In my opinion, the rancho was probably one of the most important foreign institutions in American life today, because so many Mexican immigrants who are now it's an unprecedented scope. No other immigrant group has gone from Alaska to Atlanta in huge numbers anywhere everywhere in the United States like Mexicans have. No other group. Italians didn't, Chinese didn't. And they are changing parts of the country in really important ways for good and for bad, or better for worse. So they had, the understanding the rancho is so important for American today, I think. And a lot of the attitudes that the rancheros bring are really important. A very pioneering, self-reliant, independent kind of ethos they bring to it, extraordinarily hard work. All of these things are great attributes. There's also the idea that we're not going to get involved in politics, because back in Mexico, getting involved in politics was corrupted all your friends, so don't do it. And that's one of the reasons why Mexicans are not very politically involved. I think that's probably the main reason why Mexicans are not very politically involved. Why in LA, we elected the first Latino mayor in 2005, and most of that was from white West Side voters. I mean, certainly a large chunk. So, and in this book, the second book, there's a story of how that plays out politically. There's a small town called Southgate. It's a whole bunch of suburbs southeast of LA that are very important, I think, in immigration history. in which you can read the chapter, but it's about corruption that takes place because people take advantage of immigrants, Mexican immigrants almost entirely, who have this idea that it's not really important to be involved and civically involved, you know. And so I had spent a lot of time in ranchos and covering them. My first book there's 2 or 3 stories that grow out of that culture in one way or another. There's a lot of problems in rancho culture, very, you know, not, people don't always look kindly on educating women. People don't, there's that political idea that you don't really want to get involved, you just want to do your own thing. There's also an awful lot in the Mexican context, in Mexico, of backbiting, envidia, envy is really part of life, intensely part of life. And it's true that almost all Mexican immigration grows from the rancho. If you look at the top sending states, Jalisco, Michoacan, Zacatecas, Sinaloa, you can go down, there's Durango, there's a long list. Those are the states that have sent huge numbers of people here. Almost all of those are basically ranchero states. The ranchero is the guy who avoids the government's paternalistic embrace in a way that I find very healthy. But again, there's a lot of envy and competition, and people are not always cooperative. They don't cooperate easily. It's a intensely competitive thing. And above all, everyone wants to be their own boss. Nobody wants to be part of some large corporation. And it's the rancho is why so many people emigrate. It's poor, and rancheros have always been moving to the frontier, you know, since basically for 200 years in Mexican history. They've always been on the frontier. Wherever the frontier is, you find people wanting to go there to escape the town, the lawyers, the mayor, and all this kind of claustrophobic stuff that takes place. The United States was just the next frontier, and that's why so many of those folks left, because they didn't have much at home. They were very poor. And they all also kind of had it in their DNA almost, or their culture, to go seek something else. And traveling long distances or traveling to hostile environments or forbidding environments was not really that big a deal for them. And so they came here. It's also, though, it's where immigration begins from Mexico to the United States. It's also where drug trafficking begins. For a lot of the same reasons. People are poor, people are looking for daring and adventure, some way of showing what they're made of, you know, so they can show people that they grew up with, cousins, they're usually all relatives, cousins and whoever, hey, I left poor, but I could do it. I come back, you know, rich or well off or better off. That's why they build houses back home. This book, the second book, deals almost entirely with, not entirely, but with a lot with what the redevelopment basically of large parts of rural Mexico because of ranchero dollars back home has done to Mexico. It's very healthy in some ways and not so healthy in others. But if you go around these areas, there's all these houses. They're all empty. Everyone's built their houses. No one's going back to, well, unless they're deported, most people are not going back to live in them. And so it's, to me, it's an enormously important part of Mexican culture that is poorly understood and its effect in the United States is also, therefore, poorly understood. But important because of just the sheer numbers of Mexicans in this country. You know, you got a large number here in South Bend, Indianapolis, Chicago, but also Atlanta, Tennessee, rural Tennessee and Arkansas, Alaska. I mean, it's just everywhere. We now have a working class that is a sizable portion of which is now Mexican immigrant. And understanding the attitudes that they bring are really, really important. And I saw this whole heroin pizza delivery system is completely tied in with all of that. There was almost no way of Jalisco, the town of Jalisco, is a little bit larger than our rancho now, but it has those same attitudes. Those attitudes still exist, you know. And of course, the little villages that are all around the town. There's like this town here, and then there's like these necklace of villages all here. They're all, you know, they're 1,000 people, 500 people. They're ranchos basically, Don't think that they're ranches. Rancho now in Mexican parlance does not mean a ranch. It means a smallish village that once was a ranch, maybe 50, maybe 100 years ago, but now has really become a little village that has its own attitudes and usually is not, in comparison to another form of small village called the ejido in Mexico. The ejido is a communal farm that the Mexican government promoted as a way of for a lot of reasons. The positive view of ejido is a way of making it easier for small farmers to cooperate. The negative is that it allowed the government to co-opt all those people, and that's what they did. And with loans, with seed, with a variety of government programs, they kind of bring them in, then the ejido became a largely, I believe, non-productive form of agriculture. Yes?
Do ranchos just exist in Mexico? Like, are they unique to Mexico?
The ones that, they might be called something else somewhere else, but in Mexico, it's definitely a big part of the culture. All the stuff cultural stuff that you might know from Mexico came from the rancho. The cuisine, tequila, mariachi music, charreria, the big sombreros, the cowboys and all that stuff, It's interesting because it's the place that received least government help but became most productive and developed the best, the attitudes most appropriate to dealing with the larger world in a lot of ways. And that was really important. It also, I was just meeting with some cops, as I told you, and I said, look, if you're interviewing a Mexican guy, find out what rancho he's from. Sometimes it won't be, but most of the time you will find that if you dig down deep enough and you keep asking, you'll find that this guy came from some small little place that you will not find on a map. He'll tell you it's a bigger city because nobody would know where his town is. But once you get used to that as a reporter, an investigator of some kind, then that's kind of how I approached it. I felt like, no, these guys, that's why I said when that guy told me Tepic, I was sure he was wrong. I just knew, I could feel it. And so I just write to all these guys, and eventually one of them, bless his heart, writes back or calls me and says, yeah, we're not from Tepic, come on. And I knew it. I guys, yeah, man, and that's what got me going. It was really kind of a fun feeling to feel like I knew I was right about that, damn. And that nobody had ever written about these guys, and most cops didn't even know what they were dealing with, was also fun to know that. There's the next part on the research was finding cops who knew about these guys, and you'd find one in certain areas. One guy had spent the time, and even that guy sometimes didn't have a clue what he was looking at. He just knew that he'd say they're all from Tepic, or they're all from Nayarit, or they're all from Mexico, which is not terribly helpful, for me certainly. The guy in Idaho, who was the guy that I credit with having first figured it all out, the investigator in Idaho, Ed Rupplinger, that guy figured it out. He didn't speak a word of Spanish. He didn't know anything about this, and for a long time he still thought he was dealing with people from Tepic until I met with him and we went over he had these old phone records, and I say, no, look, all these phones, they're from Jalisco. You could see the prefixes where Jalisco, they're not from Tepic, they're all from this one little town. They all know each other. That's the key to it, So that was part of the Mexican part of the methodology, was that, just relying on experience of having been through the country so much. As a reporter, you find that there's no real substitute for that. People want to think, people want to think that there is some way of doing these jobs without spending lots of time, and the truth is there is not. They're really not if you really want to understand, dig deep, and I like that kind of work. That's the most exciting. That's what makes journalism the most exciting job you could ever have, in my feeling. It's just you dig and dig and dig, and you find some unreal, weird story, like an entire village where everyone sells heroin like pizza, for God's sake. I mean, you know what I mean? It just it blew me. I couldn't believe it. I was like, wait. The guy on the phone, he said, are you sure? I mean, yeah, he kept on telling me, yeah. So that's kind of how I began all this. And then the other part of the story was the pills. Now, I was living in Mexico when all that took place. I was oblivious. That was my big learning curve. I had no idea what Oxycontin was. I'd been living in Mexico when all this was taking place that I read about. And so I didn't know that they decided that these pills were non-addictive when used to treat pain. I didn't know that all of a sudden if you went into any doctors, you were going to get a big bucket load of heroin-like substance. You know, no one told me that. I didn't know that. Although I had an appendix out in 2009 before I really got going on this, and they gave me Vicodin. Now, they gave me 2 in the hospital, and then they gave me on the way home. They said, "Oh, and here's a prescription for 60."
Oh my gosh.
So what is the message in that bottle?
Right.
They're non-addictive. It's got hydrocodone in it. That's molecularly almost identical to heroin, okay? Hydrocodone, they give you 60. Why? Because the idea was it's fine, it's okay. Did they tell you what hydrocodone is? They didn't tell me. How to use it? No. That it's risky, that it could be addictive? No. None of that did they tell me. They just said, here you go, you know? And that's what has happened for 20 years, over and over and over at doctor's appointments and hospital visits, over and over and over, all across America for 20 years. And we were talking at lunch just now, this is a supply problem. We talk about whether drug problems are demand or supply. My feeling really now is that a lot of this stuff starts with demand. Starts with supply. Supply primes demand. Back before y'all were born, we had the Colombians broke in with cocaine. We never had much cocaine demand in this country, really. And they come in begin to smuggle in tons of the stuff, and pretty soon everyone's on cocaine, and then they develop crack, which is a nice, very effective way of smoking cocaine that they figured out, and they're closely related, but I don't think it really becomes a problem until there's supply, and that's what this is about. Yeah.
In your opinion, then, is it just too late because now that regulations on these pills are starting, but for like generations that are being born right now, is it just too late because heroin is a prevalent part of our?
I'm not sure it's ever too late. There's always something we can do
I know it's an
as a
opinion
country,
question.
and also there's things that we could do as people. Like if next time you go into a hospital, you ask them to explain to you when they send you home with 60 Vicodin, and you ask them to explain why 60 are necessary. Pills are necessary, right? Because I took 2 of those pills that I had. You know, I didn't know what it was. I just took 2. I don't really like taking pills. I really like to not take pills. And so I took 2 of them. I think that the second one I didn't really even need. I just took it because maybe, I didn't know what I was doing. And I left them in my medicine cabinet for about 3 years until I realized what I had there, and I threw it all out. But we, as consumers of healthcare, need to be far more proactive in that and ask why that's necessary. Why, I had all 4 wisdom teeth taken out in 1987, I think it was. Yeah, it had to be 87. Never once did they give me any heroin-like substance to deal with all the massive pain you're most likely going to deal with. How will you ever deal with it? Oh my God, we're going to have to give you this. No, it was like Advil, I think, or something. Tylenol. And that was fine. There was no problem. It's like we treat everybody like, you're going to feel some pain. How dare you? You'll never be able to survive it. You know what we do? It's okay. And so basically, as people, we can ask. We can take account of, and we can also be far more accountable for our own wellness. This is a really big part of it, I think. Instead of going to a doctor and saying, fix me, and by the way, I'm not going to do anything you tell me to do that might help, like swim more or walk more or stop drinking soda altogether, which is basically what I've done. That kind of thing, to take care of our bodies, be participants in taking care of our bodies. That is one of the lessons to come out of this. So we treated for so long, it's like, you help me, you fix me, damn it. And if you don't, I'm writing you up a bad review. You didn't give me all the pills I wanted, I mean, that is so, it's so contrary to my view of what the country's about. Let's put it that way. That we are accountability is a big part of the American system, but it's has to start at home. We can't say, I want the doctor to be accountable and I want this to be accountable. Everybody's got to be accountable except for me. I'm going to still eat my Doritos. You know what I mean? That kind of thing. It's taking possession of your own body and your own body's wellness. That's a big part of why this happened. Nobody wanted, too many people, let's put it that way, didn't want to do that, you know. Yeah, I'm sorry.
So Leah had something.
Oh, I was just gonna say I recently got my appendix out, and they've gotten a little bit better with it. They say take a Tylenol or Advil, and if that doesn't work, here's this. So I got hydrocodone and acetaminophen. I only got.
That's Vicodin.
Yeah.
Basically. Yeah. Well, that is better. I mean, I think I would have saved the money on the Vicodin had they told me that. I didn't know what Vicodin was at the time. So I think little by little people are coming around to this idea that you need to actually inform you somehow. Even if I think every prescription for hydrocodone or oxycodone should be accompanied by, this is it's a very, very good painkiller. It's also molecularly similar to heroin, and you got to be careful that you don't, that kind of thing. If you give people that idea, then people say, okay, they can make their own choice instead of just downing the stuff, and then you didn't have a problem, but I guarantee you so many people have gotten addicted because of that. Just pills because the doctor said take them, because I don't know. The doctor's not offering me any explanation, or the nurse or whatever, that I'm just like, okay, well, I'll take a pill for every damn thing, don't we? I mean, that's not the way we are as a country, Everything's got to be like, immediate, and we got to fix everything, and we can't possibly live with any pain. Oh my God, that kind of thing. So yeah.
So is that the way you think we should educate people? Is like when we give the drugs out, or?
I think that's like one place that's very, very important to do it. Now it's much better there than. Oh, you know what? I forgot to tell you. Now that your kid's addicted. Oh yeah, bam. That isn't a highly addictive drug. I'm so sorry. Now that your kid's living under
What do you think it would like be a better idea to like start this like maybe in high school or something?
Of course. No, of course. And what also needs to take place, I think, is a kind of a teaching of wellness. Yeah. Wellness is a larger concept than just curing some pain that you have. It's about a way of life, of choosing better choices about what to eat, how much exercise to get, that you get exercise, period. It's tough in this day and age. We've built these suburbs. So many often the suburbs are like a horrible culprit in all this. The suburbs look like, they're basically centers of isolation that we call prosperity, because you can't walk around very easily. It's not like a part of the culture to walk around. You got to drive everywhere. LA, let me tell you, LA is just all about that. In these horrid places where nobody knows one another, and even within the house, the kids are isolated in their private rooms, and they got private cars and their cell phones, and they're on the phones, the earbuds all the time, and there's a lot of that has to do with our own wellness, and teaching wellness. I think definitely it should be part of like high school, not. It should be part of physical education. Physical education, when I was growing up, was a joke. Some guy who wasn't really smart enough to do anything else would throw a ball out onto the playground, go play. That was it. No idea of the exercises that you needed to do to make your body strong. No idea of how to eat. I mean, that's what that should have included. There should have been a lot of discussion about why it's really not a good idea to be drinking soda all the time, or chips, or whatever it is, and why a variety of food. That should be where all that takes place. Part of that, a lot of this book is rooted in the problem that so many people felt that chronic pain, and chronic pain is a serious issue. But a lot of it can be dealt with. Not all of it. Some of it you do need these pills. There are some people who do need these pills. Probably not as many as you'd think, and probably not as much dosage as you'd think. But there are people who absolutely need these pills. But there's an awful lot of people who can be kind of their pain can be dealt with in other ways that have a lot more to do with wellness, stopping smoking, losing weight is huge. I mean, look at all the obesity we have in this country. That's a huge part of this whole issue, I think, you know. Yeah.
Have you heard of Oregon's new way of dealing with pain and their clinics that they've sprung up?
What's that?
So it is about like a holistic approach to pain. And so there are different clinics that are that have like a chiropractor,
Yes.
they have an acupuncturist. I think they have a therapist as well. Do you think that's like a good
Yes,
system?
that was what was developing before the pills just basically took over the whole game.
Yeah, that's too
That's right.
Yeah, the multidisciplinary, and that's where, you know what also what's happening is that that's also taking place at the VA. Several places are beginning to understand that, you know, it all gets back to isolation. Don't you think? It all gets back to where we're a country where we're very isolated. We've decided that there's only one way to treat pain, right? And that's through pills. There's certain tendency to believe that there's only one way to treat addiction, and that's through abstinence. And certainly abstinence is a very important strategy, but it's not the only strategy. There's other strategies that people can use, and it depends on the individual, you know. And so the idea of this kind of holistic approach is, to my mind, common sense, number one. That not everybody is going to be benefited by massive prescribing of opiate pain pills. Now, there's a lot of other things. Yeah, swimming therapy. I think the VA has like swimming therapy. They got a bunch of them, and I think this idea was very popular. The problem is it requires a few things. It requires the patient buying in. Oh, I'll do all that stuff. And we don't want to do that frequently, and not easy. I don't want to walk for 3 miles every day, that kind of thing. But it also requires the insurance companies to fund it, and that's also difficult because they're not always seeing how it benefits their bottom line, because patients frequently switch insurance companies a lot, and so having a person who over 10 years will have a far fewer demands on the system because of less pain and all that kind of stuff doesn't necessarily behoove the insurance company. And you got to get doctors involved, and there's this kind of idea in medicine that's such a siloed industry, and that this kind of holistic thing is kind of new age and kind of mushy, and is it really, that's not real medicine. It's all about, my specialty in dealing with that. That's why one of the most amazing things I learned was that there's no society, there's no association, no journal that brings together family practice, pain study, and addiction study all in, it should be a journal of pain, addiction, and family practice, so that all those specialties can come, those folks can come together and meet and discuss. I bet there's a really good solution they could come up with if they just talk to each other, and the fact is they do not. There's no forum through which they do that. And that's the problem. That's a big problem too. Again, it's this isolation in American society. We always want to be alone, and that's great. The individual is an important part of our history, and it's a wonderful part, and we value that, and I think it's a great part of who we are as a people. But there is such a thing as taking it too far, which in my view is clearly what we've done. Yes.
I was wondering if you think there needs to be any type of reform in like the rehabilitation process, or if it should be standardized. Or
it's a tough thing. What needs to happen is, I think a lot of people need to understand that when you begin rehabilitation, the idea that you will just be rehab and then stop using forever doesn't happen that often. Let's put it that way. Okay, it's really part of rehabilitation that you relapse a lot. I tried to quit smoking. I quit smoking long ago, but in order to quit smoking, I quit 9 times, and then started again. It was my stressful job, I was a crime reporter, all this kind of stuff. And finally, it wasn't until I moved down to Mexico City, where I was breathing in some of the most foul air in the world, that I decided, okay, and finally quit. The relapse is part of it, and people need to probably understand that that's going to be part of it. So I'm not sure if what I think needs to happen is there needs to be more options and more availability of it. One thing I think is really interesting, I was just down in northern Kentucky about a month ago, And there, they have, in this one county, they have changed a whole wing of the jail. This heroin problem is off the hook in that area. It's really bad. So, and it's all, this is a white problem. There's no Latinos, no black people, no Asians that I've ever seen. Maybe there's 1 or 2 Asians that I met, but really almost 99% white people. Suburban, rural folks, very conservative mostly, They all of a sudden have seen the light, and they've begun to start to think, maybe we need to think differently about this tough on crime approach that goes back far longer than you guys have even been alive, heavy sentences and all this kind of stuff. All of a sudden our kids are facing felonies. Oh, well, and then the Christian benevolence kicks in, and we need to take care of our brothers all of a sudden. So anyway, there's seriously, that's basically what's happening. In the book, there's the judge from Nashville who just said, all of a sudden I found it very easy to get money for my drug court. Wow, and they were always calling me, hey, can I get my nephew in, that kind of thing. That has spread. I guarantee that's like, and so in Kentucky, northern Kentucky, extraordinarily conservative, very libertarian area. They have now transformed, in this one county anyway, that had space to do it. That was a big thing. That the other counties have wanted to, I think, but don't have the space to do it. This has the space to do it. They've transformed one wing, 70 beds, into an entire rehab clinic, just like the kind that you would go to on the outside if you could afford it, but you can't anymore because you used up all your money doing heroin, right? So now jail, the form that jail takes, is all of a sudden become a hugely important question. What kind of jail are we going to have? And I could see a day, maybe not 5 years, 10 years down the road or so, when most jails will see the importance of having full-time rehab clinics. That's not to say that you have a 12-step NA meeting every once in a while. That's to say that from 6 in the morning to 9 at night, you are working on rehabbing. And you make your bed in the morning, you do all these kind of discipline, you have all these physical activity, all this kind of stuff. It's not just sitting in the jail wondering how you're going to steal a cigarette. That's different. So these kinds of things have also, I think, become part of the conversation as more and more families realize a question they never ever thought they would ever consider is become enormously important. That is, what form does jail take? And I want my kid to be able to, because I can't afford it. I've mortgaged off my house, or I've depleted his college savings. There's nothing left. I mean, that's how expensive that stuff is on the outside. Now jail may be becoming that. Yes.
Do you think the privatization of jails and prisons that's becoming the new trend is going to impede them adding on to this rehabilitation?
That's a really good question. I think a lot. That's a good question. I don't know the answer to it. I think a lot of it, though, depends on the politics of it. Yeah. In areas where, like in southern Indiana, where Scott County, I've never been to it, but it sounds like an interesting place, where they've had all this outbreak of HIV and this kind of thing. That will change political calculus pretty damn quick. All of a sudden people are like, needle exchange is enabling addicts to keep using. That is true. It also keeps you from being infected by HIV, or hepatitis C. So which do you care more about? It's, well, now all the football players are all pipes. Well, then you're going to want to, that changes people's opinion pretty quickly. And so what happens in private prisons and so on, I think has a lot to do with what happens politically. It's now become, in conservative areas of this country, increasingly, not everyone, and it's not always the case that just because a lot of kids in your area are addicted to heroin that people become more liberal on this topic. A lot of times they become more entrenched because those same kids are stealing everything that grandma ever had, and damn it, just throw them in prison. I'm sick of them. I'm washing my hands of this kid. That kind of thing also happens a lot. But it's also politically palatable in a lot of areas now to propose needle exchange. the use of naloxone, the antidote that you kind of give through the nose to an overdosing patient. Good Samaritan laws, so if your friend, you guys are both using and your friend ODs and you call, you don't get arrested even if you have some, There's a variety of things, and above all, expansion of rehab alternatives as opposed to everybody gets a felony record. Because families now understand that if you have a felony record, it's almost probably about as limiting as living with an addiction. Even if you're clean. A felony record will follow you forever, and it's not forgiving. You know what I mean? So the privatization is it's a good question. I don't know what form that's going to take, but I could probably safely bet that it'll have a lot to do with what politically is palatable, and heroin makes a lot of things politically palatable. There's a woman in northern Kentucky I met. She's this kind of left-wing activist attorney. She started out as legal aid, then she worked advocating on behalf of health issues, and she's just stunned. I've been doing this 10 years, pounding on the halls of the doors of power for 10 years, done nothing. Heroin comes along, and in 2 years, boom, everyone's like, oh sure, that's a great idea. We need to expand Medicaid so everybody can get it covered, rehab covered through Medicaid. We need to do this. I mean, it's like a softening and a broadening of perspective that she has never seen in her 10 years or whatever it's been, 10 years as an activist, Heroin has that effect, It's like a baseball bat. It, hit over the head, will make you think differently. You know what I mean? It's
In your opinion, if immigrants from these rancheros could come to the United States and get other forms of jobs more easier, do you think that they would continue to choose jobs like that because they are their own boss, and that's a big value?
maybe there's it all, what I've found is a lot of this depends on the local culture. Like I've noticed that immigration, it becomes there's talked about this in my second book. Immigration, once it starts, becomes a culture of itself. I can guarantee you one thing: immigration does not almost ever solve the economic problems that push people to leave. You will see areas that have been immigrating for 20, 30 years, there's still no jobs there. Tons of money has been flowing in. People build up houses, they have quinceañeras, the 15-year-old birthday parties, the weddings, they get buried, whatever. There's a lot of money, dollars that flow in, but there's no factories. And you know why that is? Is because anyone who would want to relocate a factory or some large job producer enterprise to an area like some of these ranchos would want to pay a low wage. That's the reason you would move there, as opposed to like Guadalajara or someplace else, right? You would go to these areas because you would say, okay, what is my benefit? Lower wages. But those people are already used to, once you work for $15 an hour, $15 a day is not gonna work. You'll probably rather starve, basically. It's just you can't see yourself doing that anymore. And so immigration creates a culture of leaving. And also successive waves of kids go north because they don't want to be the only one left behind who doesn't have some great story about what it's like to, what all the girls are like in the United States, and what a big car that they had, and all this kind of stuff. So you have a culture that builds up that I think is part of why people leave. And that culture, I was at a Vanderbilt University about when the second book came out, and I said the only way that this is going to stop, this culture is going to stop, is through cataclysm. And sure enough, what have we had since then? A ferocious drug war. Almost a depression in this country, so the jobs and the hours you could work just collapsed. And the militarization, or the strengthening, whatever you want to call it, of the border, making it now to the point where you have to pay $6,000 to $8,000 to $10,000 per person to cross. It used to be $300-400 not so long ago. Now it's $6,000, $8,000, $10,000. All of that has helped put an end to the culture of, I think, generally speaking, or put a pause anyway on large amounts of immigration from Mexico to the United States. Still coming from other places, Central America, Belize, Ecuador, places like that. but it's not the same as it used to be from Mexico. And so that culture is gradually weakening. If there were, it's a tough question. I think in certain areas people began to migrate because everybody else did, and not so much because, I mean, and also you could see with the benefits, people would come home and build houses and that kind of thing. When the cost and benefit are almost equal, or the cost is more than the benefit, far more, as I think is more or less the case today, then I think you tend to get, and that is true for people who are doing illegal stuff as well as people who are doing legal jobs.
Well, your book points out another important thing, which is if not the children, then the nieces and nephews of the rancheros who came here are going to college. They're becoming professionals. This is another important thing. They're moving to the cities and getting educated.
Yeah, and I think you're seeing that in the southeast cities, southeast of LA. Increasingly, you're seeing. There was an interesting mall built in Southgate about 5 years ago. Southgate's a little town southeast of LA, was all white. And in 1980, it was 90% white, and by 1990, it was 80% Latino. And most of them are Mexican immigrants. So all these areas have become intensely Mexican. There's almost nobody else who lives there. And for a long time, it was like a big rancho. To me, those whole areas looked like a big rancho with more money, shinier trucks. People were still into their horses. They kept their horses somewhere else. It was really big horse culture and all that stuff. Ranchero music, corridos, and all that stuff. But lately, they built a mall in Southgate, and they did. I talked with the people who built it, and they said, we did a consumer survey. And overwhelmingly, the consumers in our area said they didn't want not one Latino aspect to the whole mall. Nothing. Chipotle. That's it. You have Michael's Arts, you guys, maybe Anna's Linens, Walmart is the anchor. You have In-N-Out Burger, which is, I don't know if you guys know LA, but In-N-Out is the best burger place probably in America. It's true. You have Forever 21, is that the name of that store? Yeah, all these stores have nothing to do with Mexico. Now, they had built another mall in 1991 or 2 or something like that. They called it El Paseo. It had all this Latin theme to it. There was all these, it was a taqueria there. They had a movie theater. They played a lot of Latino movies came out. They played them there. That's on the other side of town. And now this new one gets built, and they I can't remember what it's called. Some bland suburban name, I'm sorry. It's called the Azalea. And Azalea Festival was the festival that the white population started in the 40s and 50s.
Right.
So, but the interesting thing was I spoke with the person at the development office, and she said we did they didn't want any, and it's all because this is the second generation, and they don't want to be. They're not thinking of going back to Mexico.
Well, what I was referring to was that the remittances that come back, and the money from the black tar heroin is going
back in Mexico.
The nieces and nephews of the young men, or maybe their children by now, they're going to University of Guanajuato, and they're going to the University of Jalisco.
I think that's happening. I also think
their kid, and so that's going to have an impact too, because and also Mexican families are so much smaller now.
Yes, that's true.
So they're getting, and this is what I see with the people I study from the rancho called Alvarado in Guanajuato, that their children and nieces and nephews are getting university educations. They're becoming professional, and they're not going back to Alvarado
No.
So the ranchos are emptying out.
That's also
fewer people, and their children are achieving in ways that they never dreamed possible for themselves.
Yeah, and that's kind of common with illegal substance trafficking. I mean, the Prohibition created, I think, the same issue. A lot of people do that. The only issue there is, and I'm open-minded about this, but questioning because I've lived in Mexico and seen that just because you have an education in Mexico does not mean that you will have a middle class life. And a lot of times people get at engineering, law, doctors, a lot of different things. And it's just the system in Mexico is so oligopolistic, so contracted at the top that it doesn't matter what, I've met a ton of taxi drivers who are architects and lawyers and accountants and all these. They had a lot of education and they couldn't pull it off because that's the way Mexico is, and that's why we have so many Mexicans here. It's not just at the lower end where that takes place, it's also in the middle, and so it's something that is happening, and of course no one wants to leave, particularly family. Once you have a family, you don't want to leave, but whether or not that will lend itself to a larger middle class, I don't know. I'm hoping, always hoping, that it will, because I think, because I want Mexico to do better. And it won't do better until it develops a large middle class, I believe. But what exactly happens out of that is a big question. I don't particularly know. So
we have some other questions. Who wants to go next?
Shoot them out.
I guess I can go.
Yeah.
So I guess the thing I picked up whenever I was reading the book is that I sort of felt like the Jalisco drug trade wasn't like terribly, I guess it was a little bit, it was immoral, but like it was sort of the lesser of two evils in like comparison to like the Colombians shooting up the strip mall in Miami.
Yes, but
so do you believe it's like, do you believe it was like
it's a disaster? It's a
it is a disaster, but considering like we can't stop the drug trade. We've been trying to do it for 100 years, and it's just persisted. So is this not a better alternative than the brutal?
Oh, is it better than having insane guys with AK-47s shooting up our streets? Yes, yes, that's true. It is. And chopping off heads and all that, of course. But and I can have some sympathy and some maybe even a little bit of admiration for people, but I still have to think that this is a disaster. There's no moral reason why or ethical reason why you should do this. Okay, it's just not.
I'm not saying that it's morally just or morally right. I'm saying, isn't it more morally neutral to let these people do what they're doing? because like when you think about it, these huge cartels are going to come in and fill the need no matter what. Or the Colombians are going to come in and fill the need, and they're so much more violent and brutalistic than anyone else. Yeah. And is this not a better alternative?
Maybe. To my mind, it always seemed that the people who had to do it, who did it, particularly the drivers and the guys who were just Joe Schmoes, they weren't really killers of any kind, that they had to do a lot of soul searching or banishing of the questions. Mm-hmm. That's what frequently happened. Like, I can't really think about that. I cannot think about that because I just need to make my money, and poverty will make people do that. On the other hand, there's a ton of people, far more, from Mexico and other countries who've come here and not engaged in any illegal stuff, and on the contrary, helped build the country, help add productively to the country, that did not feel the need to sell this awful stuff, And so, here's my feeling on the drug war is this. It's a little contrarian maybe. It is true that we have not stopped, but I don't think that's really the measurement always that's the best one. The best one is, another question to ask would be, what would happen if, first of all, we were not fighting drug trafficking at all? We still kept them illegal, but there was none. It would be far, far worse. So that you have to gauge what does law enforcement and all this stuff, what is its effect? Its effect is to keep a lid on it, even though it's still there. Now, of course, you can talk about legalizing drugs. That's another option. When it comes to heroin, I do not think heroin should be illegal. I think we already have legal opiates. One of them's called methadone. And you can, if you want, a much better way of using opiates every day is methadone. Even though I'm not saying you should go out and try it, nor am I saying it's a good thing. It's still an opiate and you're still tethered to it. You can't really go far away from it. But methadone response, the euphoria is more like this. It's like this gradual thing. So they've found that methadone allows people to lead normal lives and talk about things that don't have anything to do with procuring heroin or dope every day. So, but heroin you rise and crash 4 or 5 times a day. You use it, boom, it's like within an hour, 2 hours, like crack. Crack's the same thing, you know. Smoke it, bam, and then bam, and you want more. So you constantly are thinking about it. So legalizing that drug over methadone, I think methadone is the option. If you know, we have that, and it's cheap. It's 50 cents a dose. It's liquid. You go to methadone clinics, some of them are really ratty places and some of them should be closed. Others are doing a pretty good job, and it's just a clean, well-lighted place for your dope addict, basically. And the person who and eventually I'm hoping they'll develop, you know, maybe for those who can be trusted with some pills, you just don't have to go in every day. Because a lot of people live far away from methadone clinics. I'm not saying methadone clinics are the cure-all to this, but in terms of talking about when you get to talking about legalization, I don't see how heroin, as I said in the book, the only reason heroin is still with us is because it's a great drug for traffickers. Traffickers figure out a way to you can hide it easily, you can dilute it, and the person once addicted has to have it every day, you know. And so to me, that the question of whether this drug war is winnable, I think, is not probably the right question. How we should legalize narcotics or drugs of all kinds is a whole other issue. We can talk about marijuana in a little bit if you like, but this to me is kind of maybe not exactly the right question. I think most traffickers today realize they learn from the Colombians. The Mexicans learn from the Colombians. You go around shooting up strip malls and killing 10 people to get one that you really wanted to kill. Pretty soon, look what happened to the Colombian cartels. They're toast. They're done. They're no longer in the Mexicans' control at all, and they have a much different view of what drug trafficking ought to be, you know, and mainly having to do with no violence here in the United States, of course, you know. Yes.
I guess that pertains to my question a little bit. I was asking, like, how should the prosecution of the crime be viewed, or how should that be addressed in the United States for both sides, for the drug trafficking side and the pharmaceutical?
For the drug traffickers? You mean people who are selling drugs to make money, not addicts who are selling drugs to support their habit, because there is a difference in how that works. I mean, my feeling is that you have to deal very strongly with those guys, honestly. I mean, the guys from Jalisco expected to be dealt with very harshly, and when it didn't happen, when it was like catch and release, because they thought these guys at first, well, in a lot of places, they thought these guys were just like low-level nobodies, you know, instead of part of some vast network of guys who were spreading slowly across the country, then that encouraged people, go back home and at parties, people, no, they don't do anything. They deport you. You come back in a week. Or you change your name, you go to another town. Whatever it is. No, I do believe that you cannot have illegal drugs and not prosecute fully the traffickers. Guys bringing in. Now, the question then gets back to whether drugs should be legal, and that's a whole other debate. And I think, as I said, I don't think heroin should be illegal. I think we already have an illegal opiate, and that people should switch to methadone. And if that's if you want to be an opiate addict, you could switch to methadone and live a life that's basically truncated. But at least you can have a job, you can have a relationship with your kids. You don't go stealing stuff all the time. It's cheap. You know, it's another way of living. It's not one that I would want, but I don't believe that we should legalize heroin. When it comes to prosecuting who do you say, addicts or no?
No, I was talking about the other side, the pharmacy.
Well, I mean, they've been doing that, and I think a good, there's a lot of doctors that have been prosecuted for this, largely because I think most of the doctors get too caught up in the money. The opiates are very easily, it's very easy to build an entire business model around opiates because the customer always has to buy the drug. You cannot not buy it. You know what I'm saying? So I think frequently doctors who start out well-meaning get their ethics or their morals kind of corroded or worn away with time. And they begin to do things that they never would have done 5 years earlier, you know. And it's the money and this kind of thing. And so I think it's unfortunate because a lot of doctors I think that have been prosecuted probably did not start out that way, but then allowed themselves to be just kind of drift, you know, they just drifted away, their moorings were lost, you know. So that is a part of it. I'd still, and the game's not over yet, I think, but you know, the cigarette companies eventually had to pay an enormous settlement for their operation, and I believe that there may come a time when pharmaceutical companies, I don't know if criminal prosecution is always the best thing that corporations understand. It's more like large fines. Maybe some prison time helps, but so far Purdue Pharma hasn't had to do that except for once, you know. And so I don't know, because the problem is, unlike cigarettes really just have, well, I used to smoke. I could say that I did get some enjoyment from smoking, but these pills do have like a legitimate use, you know, and it's very important use. It's not like they're all bad for you, you know. There's a lot of people who do need them for chronic pain, and there are a lot of people who do need them for post-surgery and that kind of stuff. It's really important to remind yourself of that. I think, therefore, it gets down to all of us. I really do believe it's about returning to our American roots, you know, of requiring ourselves to be more accountable. You know, and so when you go into a hospital and they try to give you this stuff, or somebody you know, you question that. You ask the question, why should this be? Because that's really the source, I think, you know, of all this. It's just us demanding it, us demanding quick fixes when there really is, you know, life isn't about that. It's you know what I'm saying?
So you're saying instead of like looking at the top, we should start at the bottom?
I think while we're looking at the top, I think in families, people need to talk about that. Schools, people need to talk about that. What you should say to a doctor when the doctor tries to push you to take a prescription of 60 Vicodin. No, you're going to need this. You're going to need this, and you'll say, "Give me a prescription for 6." Okay. If I have problems after that, I'll take Tylenol. If that doesn't work, like in your case, you know. I'll take Tylenol. If not, I'll use the 6, and if that runs out, then I'll come back. But sending people home with 60, that's why we have the problem. So many kids break into medicine cabinets and find 60 Vicodin or Percocets, and that's where you start. You know, it's with those little things. And then Oxycontin is the big game changer that is the bridge. Basically, Oxycontin, those things don't lead to heroin so much. They lead to Oxycontin. Before there was Oxycontin, people were not going from Vicodin to heroin. It really didn't happen. You know, you need that bridge with a big wad of dope that's easy, and you think, oh, doctors, you know, it's got the stamp of the pharmaceutical company, doctors prescribe it, must be okay. You start taking that, and then that's when heroin comes along, not from a 10 milligram dose of Vicodin, say. Yeah, did you have a question? No. Yeah.
So, like, I guess, how do people make that jump, in your opinion, from going and taking a pill to like injecting yourself with something? Because I feel like that's like a big thing of like putting a needle into yourself.
Yeah, you're absolutely right.
Because like I mean, I work with like diabetic kids a lot, and like they have big troubles with putting these tiny needles in them, and then you have heroin addicts, you know, going to putting these needles in their veins. You know, how do you make a big jump?
I mean, it's what dope does to you. It's what opium-based drugs do to you. You think. I was talking with some cops, and I swear everybody I meet says, start out saying, they'll tell me later, after it's all, their life has been kind of mangled by all this, they'll say, I started out thinking I'm never going to do drugs. And then I smoked high potency weed, and I said, well, I'll never do heroin. And then I did, or I never shoot drugs, or whatever it is. And then I started getting into pills, and I never do Oxycontin. And then I did Oxycontin, I said, I'll never do heroin. And and what ends up happening is this is how our bodies work. This is how these drugs act on our bodies. You always need more, particularly opiates, you always need more and more and more. And eventually, one way of administering it won't do. Smoking it won't do. So you eventually, after your tolerance gets large enough and you become this real, it becomes a real issue, you begin to shoot up. And the way you shoot up Oxycontin is you just suck off the time release mechanism, the coating, and you're left with a full whack of oxycodone, 40 milligrams or 80 milligrams, and you liquefy that and shoot it up. And it's the gradual thing. No one starts here and goes right to this. It's a gradual thing, like the frogs cooking in the where they turn up the heat, just gradually they cook. It's a gradual thing where your tolerance rises, and when your tolerance rises, after a while you physically cannot live without it. I was at a conference in Cleveland. One of the speakers before me said, heroin attacks the same thing that makes us desire sex, food, water, and love. And it becomes, how many of you would like to go for a while without sex, food, water, or love? Nobody raised their hand. Well, heroin becomes part of that, that group. It takes over in a more complete way, even than a lot of times, And so you can't not do it. And so you're always searching for that. You're always looking for that next high. And that's how people get from Vicodin, Percocet and Vicodin, or maybe high potency weed to Percocet and Vicodin to Oxycontin to heroin. Something that they once, 2 years earlier, a year earlier, 9 months earlier, said they would never, no way would ever do that, But that's part of the enormous consequences. When I was in high school, the dope was marijuana, and it was weak, and it really didn't lead anywhere most of the time. I mean, for some people it did, but it really was so weak that it didn't do anything. Now the consequences for every mistake you make are massive. They're life mangling. For little dopey things that you did when we all do, because we're all dumb, when we're, 15 or 17 or whatever. We don't know what we're doing, Oh, sure, I'll take a pill at a party, and boom, completely unforgiving,
So do you think if we take that bridge out, if we take Oxycontin out, will the train get shorter, or will it stop?
Well, in some areas, a lot of times the problem is that they've done that, and a lot of people switch to heroin now. Now, for people who are still coming up, right? People who are just coming up, I have this conversation with my wife all the time about how to prevent our 9-year-old from becoming a heroin addict. Okay, and part of the thing when you write a book about this topic, you just begin to think about it all the time, and I really do think about it a lot. And so the main thing is, because this drug is probably in the foreseeable future not going to be illegal, is people have to really start understanding what it means, what it's about, and you cannot just not think about it anymore. You really, particularly in areas where there's lots of addiction to it. People really, and I believe that in time people will see enough horror stories, enough people will be the guinea pigs, sadly, and die, or live in some abject way that you would never want to be yourself, that people would associate this addiction with that, and then not, and that would continue to keep people from doing. The problem is, quite disastrously, if you ask me, that so many people are kind of doomed in this, and it feels to me like it's a lifetime thing you're shouldering when you get into this. It's not something, well, I'll stop next Thursday, It's a lifetime thing, and that's the real problem with these drugs. That's why there's no recreational use of opiates. You used to be able to recreationally use pot. I don't even think that's possible anymore. Marijuana is just off the hook now. But certainly not true that you can recreationally use these drugs. It's like you might as well recreationally play Russian roulette. You know what I'm saying? I'm not kidding. That's kind of how it feels to me. Like, oh, just spin the chamber and see what happens. What the hell? I mean, literally, it's that effect on the human brain, and particularly the young human brain, like yours still are, and it's that effect on the life for after that for years. And remember, we still have heroin addicts from the 1970s who got hooked in the last big heroin thing. You can find them almost anywhere you go. There are not many of them because a lot of them died during the AIDS crisis in the 1980s, and a lot of them just died because their health, they just wither away over 20, 30, 40 years. But remember, we still have people from those years who are still addicted. You know, they're still using it. It's still like a life of complete underachievement, jail, all that kind of crap, you know, and that's what, I don't know, I'm not sure if that answers your question, but that's kind of the way I view what's going to happen. It's going to scare people, and eventually people will go away from it. But the other problem with it is that that's only part of the equation. We have far, far, far more doctors in this country than we have drug traffickers, and they have to make their switch too. And I guarantee you, if they started out the conversation, yes ma'am, here's 60 Vicodin. These are very much like heroin, so you want to be, you know, no one would take the drug, right? They would just be very, very careful with it, you know. That's what that kind of conversation probably needs to happen in every doctor's office, every hospital, every emergency room, because that's what the truth is, you know.
Well, yeah, I mean, but also on the other side of that, I guess, is, you know, a huge thing that, you know, hospitals and medical schools are focusing on now is something called like professionalism, because they feel like doctors have terrible bedside manner and we're scaring people too much and whatnot. So do you think that like that would be, you know?
No, I believe in the doctors, first and foremost, their responsibility is to tell the truth. You have to say what the truth of the matter is. Mm-hmm. This is an opiate derivative. Like all opiates from time immemorial, you know, this is the first plant we ever used as humans, as a medicine, you know, from Egypt, you know, back 1,500 years before Christ, there was Thebes. Thebes was the the opium, opium poppy producing capital of the world. That's why they have a drug called Thebaine. It's an opiate derivative from Thebes. You know, in the Tigris Euphrates, they also, you found this all through, and it's spread all over the world. You can grow that poppy in most places that, you know, that has the proper climate. It's grown. And India being one of the biggest one, I think the biggest one, and Mexico has a lot, etc. So you've got all these ways of people just need to know the truth, you know, and bedside manner. If you could be sweet and lie to people, or just so comforting and lie to people, that's what they've been doing. Yeah. Literally, I mean, seriously, when I found out that they had given me this drug to take home without telling me the risks, I thought to myself, I mean, how do you get to that point? How do you, and the way you get to that point is what I wrote about in the book. That everyone begins to think, oh, it's not addictive. It's like we're living in this Shangri-La. It's like, you know, the whole thing seemed to me to be connected also to this kind of, we lived in a time when mortgages were bundled into, crappy mortgages were bundled into big things, and Moody's called them, and Standard & Poor's called them AAA mortgages. They're all based in, there's nothing there. It's like the whole country began to kind of, you know, the whole country began to just kind of buy a lie. And I think medicine did the same. Yeah. I guess we're out of time. So thanks very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Sam.
My pleasure.
There were other questions that we didn't have time for, so if you want to email them to me, I can forward them on to Sam.
Sure.
And also, At 4:30, Sam will be down the hall. There'll be a wonderful reception with good food, and at 4:30, at 5 he'll do you're doing sort of a prepared lecture.
Right, yes.
Yeah, so I encourage you to come to that. Tomorrow morning at 9, there's a breakfast for you.
Is there? I was going to ask you what
With
I'm doing
students.
tomorrow, because I don't have a clue.
Yeah, tomorrow at 9, you're meeting with minors and supplemental majors in
Latin
Latino
America.
studies.
Oh, okay.
But if anyone from this group who's not yet a minor or a supplemental major, if you want to join, you can. And it'll be here.
In this
So
room?
at 9, right.
I see.
And then
Okay,
at
great.
10:30, grad students will meet.
Oh, great. Okay, yeah.
And
All
then at
right.
noon, there's a lunch.
Okay, good. I just was completely
But-
lost.
And then you're leaving in the afternoon.
I'm leaving in the
Maybe-
afternoon.
But somehow we have to get you to the west side, maybe. on
Oh,
your
we'll
way
figure that out.
Yeah.
We can figure that out. Yeah.
Because, he wrote the article about the Las Paletas, right? About the popsicles, so we have to take him to Rosita.
Oh, yeah. Have you? I don't know if you've read that or seen that. Have you seen there's a paleteria over there?
Yeah,
Oh, they-
it's delicious. It's good.
Yeah. You should go to the town. You should. Have you been? Yeah, we haven't been to the town, but you don't want to go to the town now because the Michoacan is insane. But if you go to the town, you will see they have a 2-story concrete popsicle at the center at the entrance to town. It's on my website. Yeah, you can go there and it's just this enormous thing, and this thank you to the popsicle, the most important product. That's the only other product that I found besides immigration and drug trafficking that leads people from poverty to the middle class. The popsicle.
I lived in a very Mexican neighborhood in Chicago this summer, and many people were from Michoacan, and there were so many panaderías,
Right.
in the style Michoacana.
Right. Yeah. It's good stuff. I was just a witness in a federal trial, trademark trial, but where they're trying to understand who actually owns the trademark. There is no way they're going to figure that out. Nobody owns a trademark. It's just a business model that everybody can
Everybody
imitate.
can adopt,
Yeah. Right.
That's
right.
so cool.
Just because I've
Yeah,
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 too and have to walk to them.
How do you want to come?